Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. It is February the 6th, 2025. Understand the fight has not yet been formally announced. But let's talk about the possibility, and it sounds crazy, of Canelo fighting Jake Paul. But first remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me just say, sometimes you're gonna make a bet and it's gonna look ridiculous at first. But hear me out here. This fight's a big mistake for Canelo. Right? The Jake Paul who fought Mike Tyson, if you stuck around for that fight, right, moved incredibly well. That fight was actually won on Jake Paul's foot speed, Jake Paul's mobility, Tyson's inability to get close to him. Now, we can talk about what actually happened. Mike definitely couldn't pull the trigger in some situations. I'm not saying that the Tyson who fought Jake Paul was prime Tyson, even though I expected him to win the fight. But you can imagine, I'm watching the fight. I've followed Jake Paul's career for years. I think I have a group of Jake Paul videos here online over the years. I was not expecting Jake Paul to move as well as he did, especially after the weight gain. Right? Jake Paul shows up, he's weighing in the 220s. Now, the devil here is going to be in the details in terms of this Jake Paul Canelo fight. Right? What weight are they fighting at? How many rounds is the fight? Clearly, Canelo has gone 12 rounds. Right, with people like Jaime Munguia, right, Edgar Berlanga. In other words, recent Canelo has gone 12 rounds. Jake Paul hasn't, right? So if it's a 12-round fight, 3 minutes a round, there's no excuse here, right? There's no guy in his 50s here, right? 3 minutes a round. If it's 12 rounds, Canelo has the advantage late. Right? If it's 10 rounds, folks, you're introducing variance. If it's 8 rounds, you're introducing a lot of variance. A lot. Let me also say this too. Jake Paul, as I've said here online for years, as he's shown you in fights like the Nate Robinson fight. I understand Nate, basketball player, not a professional boxer, but just understand, Jake Paul showed the power. Right? The Woodley fight. Jake Paul showed the power in that rematch. Jake Paul has, whether you think he can fight or not, he has an A-level straight right hand. Right? That right hand has ring coverage. So the point I'm making to you is simply this, and this is an opportunity in time, right? If Jake Paul is allowed to come in weighing 210 or more, if you feel that Canelo, who's scheduled to fight Terence Crawford at 168 pounds, in other words, Canelo can't allow himself to balloon to 200 pounds. If you feel that Canelo is going to be close to 168, maybe 175, but that's about it, right? Isn't that where he fought Kovalev? Then just understand, if Jake Paul is a prohibitive underdog, and by that I mean, 8-1 and higher, then believe it or not, folks, Jake Paul is the betting side of the play, right? Understand, this is a different Jake Paul than the guy who lost to Tommy Fury. This is a much bigger guy physically who has worked on movement. He's added things to his game. He's not going to be standing there waiting for Canelo to walk up to him like Rocky Fielding was. Right? He's going to be moving. And understand, Terence Crawford, who is a closer, the only fight of Crawford's to go the distance over the last several years was the Madrimov fight. But Crawford weighed 154 for that fight. What if Canelo is now fighting a puncher who weighs in at 210 or 220? Folks, that's a bridge too far. Understand, Jake Paul can run away from Canelo. Dare I say it? Jake Paul has the better legs than Canelo. It is what it is. Right? Canelo has an A-plus left hook, but if Jake Paul is prepared for it, if he knows not to walk into it, if he knows to stay outside, if he knows to be on his back foot, if he watches films like the Floyd Mayweather-Diego Corrales film, that's right now in my favorites folder, and realizes that he has to lead with power shots. Right? Mayweather, it was a left hook. He was outside, then he would throw a left hook. He would jump in the pocket, throw a left hook, then he would get back outside. Right? Understand, the Diego Corrales that Floyd Mayweather fought was the same Corrales who fought Castillo. Right? When you saw Corrales against Castillo, you thought, oh, every fight Corrales is in must be a shootout. There is no shootout in the Mayweather fight because Mayweather controlled that fight with movement. If Jake Paul figures out that the movement and the size, his right hand, if he wants to develop a left hook for this fight or a right hook that would take him away, on the other side of Canelo, he has an opportunity to do so. Right, folks? I'll be the casino's Huckleberry here. I'm not expecting Jake Paul to win, but he's worth the bet. Right? Understand, 8 rounds, Jake Paul can move for 8 rounds. How many rounds was the Mike Tyson fight? I know 2-minute rounds. Okay, fair enough. I feel Jake Paul can move for 8 rounds. Jake Paul has the legs working. He has a punch. Many of his wins are by stoppage. He's not going to be in the pocket trying to play chess with Canelo. He's much heavier than Canelo. This would be like, let's say, a Gilberto Ramirez throwing hard shots at Canelo while staying outside. Right? Look at a masterpiece fight. Him against Gulamarian. Look at Gilberto Ramirez against Joe Smith. Right? I feel a Gilberto Ramirez because of size. Because of knowing how to stay outside while also having enough of an inside game to come in at angles when needed, would beat Canelo. Right? I believe Jake Paul, because of size, would be something Canelo hasn't faced. Now, I understand that when Frank Sanchez was under Eddie Reynoso, Canelo would spar with Frank Sanchez. And Frank Sanchez has given interviews where he talks about how Canelo hits like a heavyweight. And there's video here online of Canelo backing up Frank Sanchez. Right? Okay, fair enough. Right, folks? Understand, Frank Sanchez fighting a stablemate is not going to try to hurt Canelo. Jake Paul would be trying to hurt Canelo. Right? Jake Paul would be moving around the ring. Little is expected of Jake Paul. This fight, at first glance, seems like a novelty fight, doesn't it? Right? Well, folks, Jake Paul weighed in the 220s and moved extremely well against Mike Tyson. Right? Jake Paul's not lingering in the pocket in that fight. If Jake Paul, who's going to enter the ring with very low expectations from the public, right? Ask yourself, what does Jake Paul have to do to exceed expectations? People are going to say survive. Right? The movement I saw with Jake Paul tells me that if he can avoid a pocket being formed, if he makes it to the third round, folks, there's going to be a stir. If Canelo comes in and if he's reckless, and if Jake Paul's able to catch him, there's going to be a stir. Understand, Canelo would be getting hit by a cruiser or heavyweight. I guess in today's boxing, we have to also mention Bridgerweight. Right, folks? In the pocket, it's no match. But sometimes you can win a fight outside of the pocket. Right? If the casino makes Jake Paul an 8-1 underdog, that's the side of the play I'm going to be on. Right? Understand, too, the shorter the round total, the harder it is for Canelo to get a stoppage. How many rounds did Caleb Plant last against Canelo? Right? I just mentioned that Jaime Munguia and Edgar Berlanga went the distance against Canelo. John Ryder went the distance against Canelo. Can Canelo, with all the high expectation, be certain that he's going to win a decision against a Rocky character? Understand, a lot of the people watching the fight, you saw the crowd in Texas for the Tyson fight. Right? Understand, a lot of the people watching the fight are casual sports fans. This isn't the fans who show up for Beterbiev against Bivol. Right? This is a different fan base. These are young people who just want to see excitement, who may have followed Jake Paul from his YouTube career. Right? This isn't the hardcore boxing fan who's sitting there thinking to themselves, yeah, I saw Beterbiev against Yard. I saw Beterbiev against Joe Smith. I saw Beterbiev against Callum Smith. I saw Beterbiev against Marcus Brown. Throw all that out the window. This is the crowd that is going to buy the hype. Jake Paul, our generation, one of us. Right? Canelo, even though Canelo's not that old, he's on the other side of 30. Right? Canelo has been around for a long time because he started fighting as a teenager. Worse yet, insiders know Canelo has even more fights than are on his record. Right? Young people are going to view him as old news. Right? They're going to view him as, yesterday. They're going to view Jake Paul as part of a crusade. What happens if this fight gets announced? Jake Paul is a shrewd businessman. That Tyson fight was not pay-per-view. It was on Netflix. What happens if Canelo, Jake Paul, is on Netflix, where, again, 60 million households, not even people, households, get to watch the fight? Folks, you're going to have a lot of people there. When these fights happen, go on X. As you're watching the fight, have a laptop off at the side and just look at people's comments. Right? If Jake Paul lands any real shots on Canelo, if he's able to move, if this fight is less than 12 rounds, and you know how boxing is, if it's the 6th or 7th round and you're thinking, man, Jake Paul's still hanging in there, right? You're looking at your card, right? You're one of these casual fans who doesn't count body shots, right? Is completely unimpressed by defense, right? You're just looking at the headshots, and you're looking at the bravado, you're looking at the corners. You know Jake Paul is the complete show, right? He's going to go back to the corner. He's going to be waving at the crowd. He's never going to show any intimidation. He's never going to show any fear. If it gets to the 6th or 7th round and Jake Paul is still on his feet, and Canelo, as he has done in some fights, the Alfredo Angulo fight, right, the Kovalev fight, where Canelo comes out and he takes off rounds, you're going to have a dynamic that's going to start to look like Tyson Fury, Francis Ngannou, where you thought you were watching a joke. Now, that fight featured a knockdown, so it was shocking. But I can tell you, looking at that fight, as it got to the later rounds, you started to think, what? Ngannou is still hanging in there. Then you were looking at your scorecards and you started to think the unthinkable. Could Ngannou actually win this fight? Right? Understand how that fight ended. You have some hardcore British royalty fighters who went on record after the fight as saying that an MMA guy in his first pro boxing match had beaten the world heavyweight champion. What happens here if Jake Paul is still going in the 6th and 7th round? It's a 10-round fight, and he looks to be not only much heavier than Canelo. We'll know he's much heavier than Canelo because the fight, I'm sure, will have a weigh-in. But he looks like he's in better shape than Canelo. Right, folks, understand. Canelo's not going to be getting hit with shots from a guy whose last fight was at 154. He'd be getting hit with shots from a guy whose last fight was against former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson. Right? If it's a 12-round fight, I'll think differently. When I say 12 rounds, let's be real here. When I say a round, I'm talking 3 minutes. Right? I understand with these contracts, they can shorten rounds and all this other stuff. But if it's 36 minutes of fighting, 12 rounds times 3. Right? And I don't know why it would be, because this wouldn't be a title fight. Right? I mean, what weight class? Jake Paul can't make 168. If Jake Paul tries to make 168, I'll certainly be on the Canelo side of the play. Right? If this is a 12-round fight, I'm with Canelo. If it's a 10-round fight, folks, I have to say, you give me 8-1, I'm on the Jake Paul side of the play. If it's an 8-round fight, I might bet even a little bit more. Right? Because the idea is Jake Paul might be able to survive 8 rounds, might be able to run for 8 rounds. And if he just lands a few great pot shots, if he does a Ray Leonard against Hagler, and in the last 30 seconds of a round lets his hands go, wows the crowd, then moves away, whether or not he hurts Canelo, you're going to have a lot of people rooting for him. You're going to have a buzz in the stadium, right? I've seen fights like this before. Revisit George Foreman against Jimmy Young. Right, folks, as you watch that fight, and Foreman falls from exhaustion in the last round of that fight. But as you're watching that fight, boxing's an expectation game. I can't sit here and tell you with certainty that Foreman lost that fight. It looked to me that Foreman, who at the time was a controversial figure, right, people viewed him like they viewed Sonny Liston. There's certain fighters who just aren't popular for whatever reason. Right? Foreman was viewed as talented, but, Jimmy Young was the Rocky figure in that fight. Right? You get to the last round, Foreman basically hits the canvas on his own. He's that tired. Crowd goes crazy. Fights in, I believe, Puerto Rico. You get to the scorecards, and of course, Foreman loses the fight on the scorecards. Right, folks? You get a situation like that here. I'm just telling you, if you're on the Canelo side of the play, if you're Eddie Reynoso and you're in Canelo's corner, you're telling him, player, we can't have this go to the distance. Right? I mean, Tyson Fury beats Francis Ngannou because Fury, in my opinion, understood he needed to win the last 2 rounds of that fight. He was able to. Understand, Fury goes into that fight not having to worry about a several dozen pound weight advantage for his opponent. Here's Canelo. If he falls behind in this fight, what's he going to do? Bum rush Jake Paul? Folks, I want you to revisit how badly hurt, I mean badly hurt, Nate Robinson was. I want you to revisit how out cold Tyrone Woodley was. Right? Wardley. Jake Paul hits hard. There's no doubt about that. Canelo, the pressure would be all on him. Right? Jake Paul can say, hey, I'm a Walter Mitty guy. I'm an adventurer. I'm Marco Polo here. I decided I was going to fight one of the best in boxing pound for pound, a sure first ballot Hall of Famer. Right? No one's expecting him to come out and back up Canelo and beat Canelo. We're expecting the Hall of Famer to show us the big difference between what Jake Paul's doing and what the people at the top are doing. Right, folks? Same equation as the Tyson Fury and Ngannou fight. Fury was lucky to win that fight. A lot of risk for this fight is on Canelo's shoulders. If I hear it's a 10-round fight, 3-minute rounds, 8-1, I'm on the Jake Paul side of the ledger. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Understand, too, Jake Paul has never been knocked out. Understand, too, I saw a fight, Jake Paul against some guy from Texas, and Jake Paul knocks him out on an uppercut. In other words, Canelo can get low. Jake Paul just has to be ready to throw low punches, right? Uppercuts, hooks, etc. I think this is a dangerous fight. I think the public should not be fooled by the fact that it's Canelo, right? I think Canelo is going to have a problem with the size gap, with the weight gap, with Jake Paul's movement, with Jake Paul's right hand. Right? I don't think Jake Paul is going to stay in the pocket. This is not going to be the Rocky Fielding fight. Right? I think Jake Paul is going to try to move away like Caleb Plant did. Just understand, Plant, 168 pounds. Jake Paul is likely to come in over 200. Right? Caleb Plant, not a big puncher. I know he looked great in the Anthony Durrell fight. Trust me. Double left hook, masterful. But not a big puncher. Jake Paul is a big puncher. Again, look at the Nate Robinson fight. Right? You're talking about a big puncher. You're talking about a problem child who truly is a problem. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. It's a numbers game for me. If they say even money, I'm like, I'm just going to watch the fight and I'm going to enjoy it. Right? If they tell me Jake Paul's a big underdog, my question is going to be, how big an underdog? If the number 8 pops up, I'll be the casino's Huckleberry. A guy with mobility, a huge weight advantage, and a right hand I consider to be an A-level right hand with an evolving skill set. Right? If he can add a left hook to it, this fight will be progressively more interesting. Right? At 8-1, I'll be on the Jake Paul side of the ledger. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. That's assuming that the fight's not a 12-round fight. I look forward to your comments.